All right, let's get underway. The preacher at 8:30 preached too long. Sorry. I've got so much I need to say these last two Sundays. I've got to figure out how I can cut that down at 11. Because we'll have even more to serve communion to, hopefully at 11. Anyway, we're glad you're here. Thank you so much for coming. Let me remind you that we have these two Sundays, this and one more, and next Sunday, time to complete the Revelation. And I intend that we have question and answer time. So I'll be to answer any question that you might have. It doesn't have to be about Revelation. It can be about anything. Anything you want to ask me, about Gail, I'll confess her sins to you. Professor said, always be careful. Confess only your own sins. But any questions you have, if I can, I'll let Gail answer them. We'll get you an answer one way or another. Okay, let's pray before we start. God, thank you for this book of yours. You know there are parts easy for us to understand and not to do, and other parts we don't understand so well. We pray for your divine guidance and inspiration. We thank you for those who have spent lifetimes studying a part of this big, thick book and have shared in writing and lecture what they learned. And we promise to do our very best to understand those things that are forever true and to do those things that you've asked of us, if you will help in Christ's holy name. Amen. Well, this week I've cleaned out the last of my books, except for a few that I'm going to bring home, but almost all of them now I've given away. This week I gave my favorite ones to our student from our church, who is now at Perkins School of Theology. His name is Benjamin Pasco. Ben graduated undergrad, Phi Beta Kappa. He's very bright, very capable. And I just felt of all the young people whom I believe have ability to make a real difference in our denomination. I wanted Ben to have my books. But as I was going over them with him the other afternoon, I was pointing out, he's learning much already, of course, at the seminary, but I told him about my commentaries. These were my commentaries, and they filled one entire closet in my office, bookshelves. I had commentaries on all 66 books. I even had a little metal case, a card file that I had made myself through the years. I bought a new commentary on one of the 66 books. I added it. So I said, Ben, here's 66 cards, and on each card, the books. But as we went through some of them, and we were boxing as we went, I was reminded about some of 8 scholars who spent 40 years of an adult lifetime studying only the writings that came from the community. And if you're new with us, let me remind you what that means. There were great persecutions of the early Christians by religious people in Jerusalem. Remember the stoning to death of Stephen for saying Jesus was no longer dead, he has been raised, and how aggressively Saul and others were persecuting Jews who were saying Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah. So in time, the original 11, Judas, of course, had died almost immediately. The other 11 scattered, dispersed. And we know a little bit about some of the places they went. But Paul doesn't tell us nearly as much as we want to know about those 11, where they went, what they did. In fact, he focused, Luke in his book of Acts, focused almost entirely on Paul, the 12, of course, as you know. Today in the sermon, I'll mention again Santiago del Compostela, where pilgrims by the thousands still come every year to see the tomb of what they believe is James, brother of John, one of the sons of thunder, whom Jesus first called to be disciples up at we don't know nearly as much as we want to know, but we know that each of them formed a community. People who wanted to hear this story from an eyewitness. Somebody who was there with Jesus during his, and who were in the city when he was crucified, and who were witnesses to the resurrected Christ. Some believe John, brother of James, one of the sons of Zebedee, the sons of thunder, Ephesus. Ephesus, of course, is in modern-day Turkey. So if you can imagine, crude as this map is, that this would be the Greek peninsula. Over here, Israel, Jerusalem, Dead Sea, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River. This is called in the Bible Asia Minor, and it still is in geography classes. Asia Minor just because it isn't nearly as big as China and India in the other part of Asia. But this is Turkey, modern day. And some believe John settled in Ephesus and did his work there. Others think that Paul would have been there at least 2.5 years and doesn't mention seeing or visiting with or talking to John. So that's others believe that he settled farther inland, still in Turkey, but a little farther inland. From that community, and most of our best scholars, all the best ones I think, believe that John died, having written nothing himself, but that those who loved him and formed that faith community around him produced a gospel, 3 letters, and the Revelation. So at Yale Divinity School, for more than 40 years, Dr. Raymond Brown studied only these 5 writings. Week after week and year after year, Dr. Raymond Brown studied those 5 writings that came out of the community of John. And as I was showing Ben my commentaries, we started with Genesis, and I didn't go through every one of them with commenting. It didn't really take us that long. But when I got down to those kinds of books, I said, Ben, I don't know if you're familiar with some of these fellows who lived before your time, but I think their writings are terrific. And Raymond Brown had commentary on the Gospel of John. And as you know, in 21 chapters here, Raymond Brown has a commentary that's about 4 inches thick. In fact, it has 2 volumes, almost 4 inches thick. But he also wrote commentary on the letters, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. He didn't want to fool with Revelation. At Princeton, a contemporary, same time frame, Dr. Bruce Metzger. We had him here in our Barton Clinton Gordy series some years ago. Already then he was in his early 80s. But here again, over at Princeton University, Princeton Theology School, Divinity School, he spent more than 40 years studying these 5 writings. The Gospel of John, 3 letters, the Revelation. And he wrote copious amounts on the Gospel of John and the letters, and one little book on the Revelation. This is what main scholars do. Ben's even gotten to Perkins after Dr. Victor Furnish is gone. Not deceased, but no longer teaching. Dr. Victor Furnish is now past 80, and he spent an adult lifetime on Paul's 2nd letter to the Corinthians. 40 years, and produced a commentary about that, on this one brief little letter. That's how intensely these professors study their special. Okay, I do have a point to this, and it is, these mainline scholars believe that whoever it was who came from that community of John, he only calls himself the elder, whoever that was that came from the community of John under intense persecutions within the Roman Empire and moved out to an island off the coast. It's a little island called Patmos. Lived in a cave up at the top of the hill. He received special visions somehow in his deepest heart, and he wrote the Revelation. Even though he uses all this highly symbolic language, our best scholars believe he really had very few points he was trying to make. Mainly that times are going to get difficult before the end, which he believed was coming very soon in his own lifetime. He kept saying over and over, it's very soon, it's very soon, it's very soon. I mean, he thought it's going to get really tough here for a while, and then it's going to be so much better because the kingdom will come to the earth as it is in heaven. God's reign will come. It will come. It's hard for us to keep holding on to that 2,000 years later because it's been a long time already, and most of our people are not sitting around thinking tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, and I don't think we have to do it that way. But we do have scripture readings that encourage us to be vigilant, be alert, be aware. For all of us, just be aware of how significant today is. This is the day the Lord has made. Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow isn't here. You just have today. How can you make the most of today? And tomorrow probably will come. The sun will rise and it'll be Monday, a new day. So, if you can come to the book of Revelation without letting all of these strange folks who have no credentials at all, none, explain all these symbols to you by conjuring up weirdest set of things that seem so persuasive if you don't know much about Revelation, instead of letting someone of the stature of Dr. Raymond Brown or Dr. Bruce Metzger, I mean, these are guys with terminal degrees in their field who then spent more than 40 years at a place like Yale and Princeton and so on, who say, there isn't that much there for you. John's talking about things in the first century. He's using symbolic language because what he's writing may be discovered, may be found, and his end would be all the more horrible if it is, if the one who finds it understands it. So he writes in this apocryphal language, and it's weird that the word apocrypha has to do with enlightenment, and for most people it doesn't enlighten at all. It confuses. But again, if you can go to sleep at night understanding what I told you again, the story last Sunday about Dr. William Willimon and the custodian at Duke University saying, he's asking this custodian late one night who was waiting to clean Dr. Willimon's office, do you understand what you're reading there? He said, well, I think I've got the main part of it. And he said, what's that? And he said, times are going to be really hard for a while, but in the end we win. And Dr. Willimon said, I think you got it. And he went on home. I think you've got it. That's what the Revelation is trying to say. Okay, so I'm not going to deal with all these verses that we dealt with just 3 or 4 years ago, but the parts that I think will help you the most. So, with that said, let's turn to chapter 11, and we're going to look at verse 15. And remember again, the significant number to John, as mostly the rest of the Bible, are 7. And I've told you that we think people started focusing on the number 7 as being special just because there are 7 days in the week. 7 days in the week, and every 7th day brought what for Jews? Shabbat, the Sabbath, the set apart, this beautiful special loaf of bread and sit down with your family and eat. 7 is a significant number. We all ascribe certain importance to numbers. And I have an agreement with each other, We talk, not every day by any means, but I see him fairly often. I don't believe I've ever called him at home. I don't remember a single time. One time he called me. There was something that it's been several years ago. And when he called me, he asked, "Where did you get this phone number?" It ends in 1818. I said, "AT&T gave it to us." He said, "You didn't have to get on a waiting list or anything?" And I said, "No. No, they just gave it to us." And he said, "Any Jew in Tulsa would probably pay you money to change phone numbers with you." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because the 18th letter alphabet is Chaim. L'chaim, to life, to life. And if you have a double Chaim, that's really special." And then he said, "Have you ever called the Zara Center, the Jewish center out on 71st, between Lewis and Peoria?" I said, "Yes, I've made reservations for meetings and things I was attending." He said, "And you never noticed the number?" I said, "Well, no, 18's not special to me. Do they have 18? He said, "Yeah, double, like you." The number at the Zara Center and our number differs just one number. It's in the first part, not the last. So there's the number there ends 1818, and Gail and my number ends 1818. We have a double Chaim in our house. Okay, so people ascribe significance to numbers. You know what it is in China, by the way, you travel there? 9. 9 is an important number there. When we were in the Forbidden City and so on, they kept saying, "See, there are 9 of these and 9 of these and 9 of something else." Well, for John, the number 7 is significant. So there are 7 trumpets and 7 this and 7 that. It means it represents wholeness and fullness and completeness and so on. 12 is a special number. Why do you think? Well, there were 12 sons of Jacob, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples of Jesus. So he sees 12s everywhere, If he loved this old disciple, then the 12 becomes very significant to him, and we're going to come to a number later today, 144. How do you get 144? You multiply 12 by 12. It's a double Chaim. Eh? So these people who come, rushing into Tulsa and charge you $500 to hear all the secrets of Revelation don't have a clue. Do not go and listen to the snakes. They will confuse you. They do not know what they're talking about. Okay, chapter 11, verse 15. Then the 7th angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven. And here are the things you need to hear John say. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of the Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever. And Handel loved those words and decided to put that at the end of the monumental work we call the Messiah. And when the king stood the first time he heard it, ever since the Hallelujah chorus, they stand. And he shall reign forever and ever. Alleluia, alleluia. So the 24 elders, where do you get 24? We're 12 and 12. 12 tribes, 12 disciples, who sit on their thrones before their faces and worship God, singing, "We give you thanks, Yahweh, Pantocrator, the Almighty, He who conquers, who are, who were," is the verb to be. The verb to be is very strange in almost every language. In addition to English, I've had German, I've had Latin, I've had Greek. To be is strange in all of those. So in English, I am, you are, he, she, it is, and so on. But the name was I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. And so you get these forms of that verb. But remember, this person, the elder who's out there in that cave on Patmos, came out of the community of John. And in John's gospel, which was based on what that faith community had heard from this one of the divine name, I am, John uses over and over. He said, Jesus, I am the way, I am the life, I am truth, I am living water, I am bread. To two grieving sisters, I am the resurrection. The verb, very important, it is to this member of that faith community surrounding John. We give you thanks, Yahweh, Elohim, Pantocrator, who are, who were, for you have taken your great dunamis, your power, and begun to reign. The nations rage, but your wrath come and judging the dead, for rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints, and all who fear, and here fear, remember, literally means to stand in, all who stand in awe of your name, small and great, and for destroying those who destroy the earth. Skip to chapter 12, verse 7, if you would. And war broke out in heaven, fought against the dragon. Let me stop a second. Have any of you read Dr. Carl Sagan's The Dragons of Eden? Have you? Good. Good for you, Alan. I loved Carl Sagan. I loved what he produced. And one of his books was called The Dragons of Eden. In that book, Dr. Sagan, remember he's the one that did the Cosmos series for PBS and taught astronomy, for years, about the billions and billions and billions of stars and so on. Well, he says that in every ancient culture, story makes where we first experimented with atomic power in the atolls, they discovered that a little bit of radiation wiped out every mammal. But old alligators and crocodiles and lizards and snakes seem to drink stuff and just keep on going. And Dr. Sagan had also read medical research that led him to believe the old reptilian portion of our evolutionary development is still in our brains. And that part of us scares us. We're afraid it will become unleashed at some point, and that eventually the frontal lobe of our brains develop. And in this lobe, Homo sapien could now project into the future. Only being that we know of who knows it's going to die. Oh, salmon swim out of the ocean up the stream where they were spawned and they died or spawned. But all who study these salmon say it's a genetic code. It's not a brain that's doing that. That when geese migrate to a certain place or monarch butterflies, it's a genetic code, but it's not a brain. It's a rational, sane process. Only humans know they're going to die, and this creates the anxiety that Jesus asks us not to let rule our lives. Don't be anxious. Don't be anxious. It's okay. Somehow you are both created in the image of God and finite. You will die. But don't be anxious about it. Live this life a day at a time as fully as you can. And one of his examples was the young man who climbed up in the tower at the University of Texas some years ago and started shooting people with a high-powered rifle. Eagle Scout, Sunday school teacher, devoted father, husband, who that morning went over to his mother's house and shot her, killed his wife, climbed up in the tower, started shooting kids on the campus he didn't even know. And when they autopsied his body, they found he had a brain tumor deep in his brain that Dr. Sagan said some concluded was pressing on the old reptilian portion of his brain that turned him into an alligator, a snake, a predator again. Well, you'll find the book interesting, I think, if you should pick it up and read it sometime. The Dragons of Eden. I loved Dr. Desmond Morris's book, The Naked Ape, too. Talking about Homo sapien, that we've lost most of our body hair, is his point. We're naked, as it were. And yet so much, as we know now, genetically, 98% the same as chimpanzees, almost as much with the great upland gorillas. And one of the things, Dr. Desmond Morris was head of the London Zoological Society for a maternal degree in his field and so on. Brilliant person. And in his story, The Naked Ape, he talks about how we all began in Africa. And DNA evidence is agreeing now with all fossil evidence that, in fact, humans first came from. Even Neanderthals who came out of Africa and had been around 40,000, had been around about 300,000 years. And then suddenly, out of Africa, this new variety called Homo sapien came all the way to Western Europe. Dr. Desmond Morris says, started in the jungle, eating fruits and nuts. But as the jungles shrank, we had to get down the plain and get to the point we could run down an antelope. With cooperation, we could run down an antelope and eat him, take him home to our families. But to do that, you got to have protein. You got to have a slower burning energy. So Dr. Desmond Morris said, so how do we eat? We choke down our protein so we can get to the nuts. Gail thinks life is short, eat first, but you're supposed to eat protein and then you get to the fruits and nuts. All right. I'm really just trying to make a point here that I think Dr. Sagan's onto something here. With what I know about ancient stories of ancient people, they almost always have a reptile in them, and it's always the enemy. It's a dragon, of one kind or another. It's a talking snake. So here John also imagines the angels in heaven fighting against dragon. The dragon, his angels fought back, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, the serpent who is called the devil, the Satan, meaning liar. And so if you're not familiar with that, it tells you the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven proclaiming, now comes the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our Elohim and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our comrades, our friends, down, who accuses them day and night before our Elohim. But they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb. Remember, it's in John's Gospel that Jesus is called the Lamb of God. And the reason, if you haven't been to communion yet, you will help us sing at 11, the Agnus Dei, O Lamb of God, that taketh away the sins of the world, have mercy upon us. A dragon defeated by a lamb. That's the imagery here. And by the word of their testimony, if no one had told the story, and if others hadn't picked up the story, how can they believe if they have no preacher, no teacher, no witness? For they did not cling to life, even in the face of death. And he's talking about this beloved old teacher, John, James, Peter, Andrew, and so many others. Rejoice then, you heavens, and those who dwell in them, but woe to the earth and the sea, for the liar has come down to you with great wrath, because he knows his time is short. John still thinks it's all going to happen in his lifetime. Skip with me to verse 18 of chapter 13. So, this calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. And its number is 666. With a little, if you follow the little letter down to your footnote, it says, well, other ancient authorities read 616. So if every time you see 666 you shudder and cannot sleep, you may have the wrong number. It could be 616. And what that means, of course, for you bright students of the Bible is before Gutenberg could crank out 100 Bibles exactly the same, there were no two exactly the same. In ancient libraries of the world, the best, in London and Paris and Rome and in our country, where our great museums have been able to accumulate them, first off, we have no autographed copies. There are no first editions. All we have, the oldest manuscripts we have, are all copies. And we mean by that the writing material would fail, and they had to copy on new material, and that would begin to fail, and they'd have to copy on new material. And every time you're copying something that, even with our tiny print, covers 1,200 pages, there's a chance you get an extra or a bonk or something, you see, or you think, well, they'd understand that better if it had 3 words here, or one more sentence, or a paragraph. And so they never agree exactly. But they play magic numbers. I've told you, this magic number game had to do with assigning a number to a letter of the alphabet. And you can spell most anything if you do that. What's the game you... Sudoku? Well, anyway, whatever that puzzle is that Gail likes to do, where you have to figure out what number translates into what letter. And then you spell out all kinds of things. What number? But every puzzle is different. Well, that's the way with this number. And so these folks that travel around the country getting rich off of folks who don't know any better, they made it John F. Kennedy when everybody was afraid he was going to move the Pope to New York City if he became president, or Washington, D.C. Some thought, oh, it's the Mormons, they'll do it. Some thought Adolf Hitler, some thought Gorbachev, some, if you put the right number with the wrong letter, you can spell anything. John knows nothing beyond his own time. You and I, you see, don't believe God gave John any special abilities that others didn't have. Prophets in the Bible didn't predict certain events at certain times on a certain day. Just, if we keep doing this, guess what's going to happen sometime? Prophets in the 8th century kept saying, if we don't reform, we're going to have some enemy overrun us. They were absolutely right, but it took over 200 years for it to happen, and then there was a Babylon who did it. You see, it wasn't a day, a time, a month. No, never. Just, if we keep on doing what we're doing now, it's going to get us in trouble sometime. That's what prophecy was about. And so John, you and I believe, I hope after all these years you believe with me on this, that the people who wrote the Bible were very real, limited by their own time and place. And John knows nothing about a United Nations or modern-day politics or oil. If you said oil to John, he thinks olive. Okay. I rest my case. Gail says she does too. You say olive, she thinks olive. Okay, chapter 14. Then I looked, and there was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. Okay, he's on the Isle of Patmos. a little island off the coast of Turkey. If you take a cruise ship to get there, it's probably going to stop at Kusadasi, and you take a short bus ride to Ephesus to see the ruins there. Patmos was a tiny little island, and so John is there all by himself in a cave. But he knows the Hebrew Scriptures. Others have taught him, and he knows the significance of a place called Mount Zion, even if he's never been there. People in my little churches and the one I grew up in saying, "We're marching to Zion." None of them had ever been there. Not even sure they knew what they were singing about exactly. It's where King David, took a little hill from the Jebusites to build a new capital city right on the border between the tribal and the southern, hoping he could reunite them. Build a new capital right on the border between these two groups, and maybe we can all be together. And that's where David began the new capital city, Mount Zion. And the prophets, even when they were in exile in Babylon, they dreamed, someday we go home. Someday we go home to Zion. And right adjoining it was another little hill called Moriah. And it was on that hill we believe that Abraham was willing to offer up Isaac, if that's what the Lord required of him. He became convinced that wasn't what the Lord was requiring of him, didn't have to kill his son. And it was on that same hill that Solomon decided to build the temple. That hill is still there, of course. There are 2 Muslim mosques on top of it now. And in time, these 2 little hills had the valley filled in. So the old ancient city of Jerusalem and its walls rebuilt through the centuries there. But this guy on an island out in the Mediterranean still envisions that the Lamb will go home where this faith community began. Not so far from his mentor, John, grew up at the lake. And with him were 144,000. And let me remind you of something. Today, when our boys, our grandchildren even, can talk about computers with terabytes and gigabytes and all that, it's too much. 1 trillion, I can write the number of zeros properly. I can do 1 million, I can do 1 billion, I can do 1 trillion. When you get past 1 trillion, I'm lost. Well, guess what? The biggest number John knew was 1,000. That was the biggest number he knew. The biggest number the Greeks had, 1,000. And so if you take 12 tribes of Israel and 12 disciples of the Messiah, and you multiply them. Have you seen all those commercials of the little children sitting around a table, and the guy asks her, "Is it better to be fast or slow?" Have you seen the one where he asked these little children, I know it's a commercial, but intending that these kids are coming up with all these magical answers, and he asked them, "What's the biggest thing you know?" And finally, one has said a gazillion or something, and the other says, "Infinity." And he said, "Well, we were really looking for infinity plus 1. And one little girl says, "Well, how about infinity plus infinity?" And another little girl says, "How about infinity times infinity?" That's a good one. And it says, "There's no question about it. This is decided," and so on. Yeah. Infinity means as far as the mind can go. And if you have infinity plus infinity, or infinity plus 1, or infinity, these are big, big numbers. Okay, so for this author, the biggest number he had was 1,000. And so if you multiply 12 times 12, and you write it with the biggest number you know, that's how many get to be in heaven with the Lamb. And literalists somehow try to figure that that's all there's going to be room for, and it doesn't include you and me. It includes only their kind. So I'm telling you, these numbers don't mean what some people think they mean. With him were 144 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the sound of many waters, like loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they sing a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures, before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who have been redeemed. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. Paul, you remember, said, you don't have time to get married and have kids. Focus on what you're doing. He's coming back next week. These follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They've been redeemed from humankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found. They're blameless. Then I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven. This is the old Greek understanding of three-storied universe, you know. So somewhere between heaven and earth and sort of a mid-heaven, there's a messenger flying around with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. He said in a loud voice, stand in awe of God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come. And worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Skip to verse 12. Endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and hold fast to the faith of Jesus. I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who from now on die in the Lord. Yes, says the Ruach, the Spirit, they will rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. Then I looked, and there was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like the Son of Man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Another messenger angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to the one who sat on the cloud, and reap, for the hour to reap has come, because the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So the one who sat on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was. And then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Then another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over fire. And he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, use your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth. Its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle over the earth and gathered the vintage of the earth, and he threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. What do we have? He is trampling out the vintage where the wrath. Okay? And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress, high as a horse's bridle, for a distance of about miles. Then I saw another portent in heaven, great and amazing, 7 angels, 7 plagues, which are the last, for with them the wrath of God is ended. I saw what appeared to be a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those who had conquered the beast and its image and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass with harps of God in their hands. And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. And here it is for John. Great and amazing are your deeds, Yahweh, Elohim, Pantocrator. Just and true are your ways, King of all nations. Lord, who will not and glory your name, for you alone are holy. All nations will come and bend the knee before you. Your judgments have been revealed. Any questions about that far? All right, go to chapter 18 with me. Let's skip to 18. We got to finish this next Sunday. After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth bright with his splendor. Remember, when things are really sparklingly bright, it's either God or someone straight from God. The words, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. And in the late great planet Earth, that had to be the Soviet Union, of course. Well, it isn't Babylon in John's time, because Babylon is no longer a great power. Who's the great power in John's time? It's Rome. But if a one happens to come upon this little island and climb up the hill to his cave, oh, you're just writing about Babylon? Well, that's nice, because Babylon has not been a major power for several hundred years by this time. So Babylon is not the Soviet Union, it's Rome. That was the problem in John's time. Fallen is Babylon the Great. It's become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt of every foul spirit, a haunt of every foul bird, a haunt of every foul and hateful beast. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. It just means they've all climbed in the same bed, all treating their people the same miserable way. God's poor, widows and orphans and aliens get the worst of it in all the nations of the earth, and God is sick of it. As one little boy in the commercial said, sick of it, sick of it. God's sick of it. The merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxury. If you went along to get along with Rome and you were sitting in the palace, you probably did all right. If you were poor, a widow, an orphan, an alien, forget it. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, this great Babylon Roman Empire, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins, so that you do not share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high, and God remembered iniquities. Render to her as she herself has rendered. Repay her double for her deeds. He's begging of God, mix for her in the cup she mixed. And he means Rome. He's giving it a female pronoun here, but he means Rome. Has she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, so give her a like measure now of torment and grief. Since in her heart she says, I rule as a queen. I am no widow. I will never see grief. Therefore her plagues will come in a single day. And what do you imagine? What did it take to bring down Egypt? Israel's God is plague on plague. And that's what he's envisioning, but he wants a okay? Therefore her plagues will come in a single day. Pestilence and mourning and famine. She will be burned with fire. For mighty is Yahweh Elohim who judges her. And the kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her. See the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, alas, alas, the great city, Babylon, think Rome, the mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And look what happens today. If the American banking system comes grinding to a halt in 2008, the tremors are felt all over the planet. The other morning, the Japanese market, in the middle of our night, dropped 7%. I got up to eat and had the television going. They were already saying the U.S. stock market was down over 100 points. Until everybody finally figured out what had gone on in Japan, and it wasn't really so big for us, and our markets right themselves later in the day. One little so if Rome goes down, what did in fact happen? John didn't live to see it. When the Roman Empire came crashing down, Western European civilization came. The big cities could no longer sustain themselves. People had to leave the city and move back out onto the land where they could grub in the earth, hunt and gather as they had centuries and centuries before. What do we call it? The Dark Ages. So even though John doesn't know how all of this, he just knows that the abuses of this empire, these thousands and thousands of slaves, when you rule with an iron hand, one day your day will come. And he didn't even want it to take as long as it did in Egypt. Do it in one day. Get them in one day. Be done with it. And all these other kings will see they've put their money on the wrong horse. That's the message here. Nothing more than that, and every bit as much as that. Well, we're going to have to stop. I got to go to church again. I'm going to write down here, Revelation 18. Let's see. Start with verse 11 next week. So I hope you'll be with us one more time, and then Dr. Tankersley is going to be teaching here on June. Start with Genesis, according to Tankersley.